Hi, this is Janae King, and I am teaching a Block of the Month quilt at Whitlock Sewing and Vacuum Center in Salem, Oregon, and I am teaching the quilt Cabin by the Lake, and it is by Royal Quilt Designs. And each month we will be meeting March through December 2018 of this year, and we will be doing a section of the quilt each time we meet. I will be going over the instructions for that section, and you will also be receiving a kit from me. And so if you're sometimes not able to make it to class or just need some review, then I'm going to do a quick video each month so that hopefully this will give you that little bit of help that you need. So before we get started, I just want to go over a couple of tips that will be helpful when you're making your quilt. And the first one is be sure and iron your fabric pieces when you pull them out of the kit. Batiks seem to be a little bit wrinkly, so you want to make sure that you iron them before you cut your pieces. You also want to chain piece your half square triangle units if you're familiar with doing it that way, because it will save you a lot of time and it will also save you a lot of thread. So the other thing that is very helpful is when you're pressing your quilt block, start on the back side of your pieces, and which would be the wrong side of fabric, and make sure that you're pressing your seams towards the darker fabric that you're working with, because when your seams lay towards the dark side, then when you flip the block over and you are looking at the block, you will not see shadows under the lighter colored fabrics. So this is the block that we're doing for March, and it is the mountain block. And this block is put together actually pretty simply. We have rectangles here, and a square. We have some rectangles here. Let me pull it apart so you can see it. It's actually just a rectangle. It's not a triangle. And then you have a square, and then you have half square triangles right here. So the pattern talks about how you make the half square triangles, and it's pretty simple. You're going to put two fabrics right sides together. You're going to mark a pencil line, so 1/4 inch on both sides of the pencil line, and then you're going to cut that apart on the pencil line. And then what you're going to end up with is actually two of these guys, and those are half square triangles. If you have the dark fabric facing up when you press, then that seam is automatically going to go towards the dark side. So just leave your triangle laying on your table like this with the dark fabric up, press it on the back side, which softens that seam, and when you go to open it up, it will just open up a lot easier, and then with the tip of the iron, just press that open. Okay, that makes a half square triangle. One of the things that the pattern is not really clear on is that these half square triangle units need to be cut down to 2.5 inch squares. They need to be 2.5 inches because you are going to pair it right here with a 2.5 inch square. So they need to be 2.5 inches, just like these guys. So the pattern talks about making 6 blocks that look exactly like this one. I will straighten that up a little bit for you. And then once you have all 6 of your blocks made, you would take one of these guys and then another one, and you would turn it 90 degrees, and it would be a mirror image of this block. So in my brain, it just didn't really make a lot of sense to me to do it that way. So what I ended up doing is I laid out the whole entire mountain block. So I had this section, and then I had the section over here, and I laid the whole thing out before I sewed it together. That way I could be a little bit more careful that my trees were going right side up on these squares and rectangles. Now some of my trees were going sideways in the half square triangles, and I didn't care so much about those guys, but I did care in these blocks that the fabric was going right side up. It is somewhat directional, this fabric, but I will promise you that in the kits to come, I will try to not have directional fabric so that that's not a problem. But the way I look at it is, it's kind of one of those skill builder things in quilting that eventually you kind of have to always be thinking about the directional fabric, and when you're cutting, you want to make sure that you're cutting correctly so that those directional prints are right side up. It makes a huge difference in your final product of your quilt. So once I had the whole entire mountain block all laid out, I actually sewed it together in rows. So I had 4 very long rows once I was done sewing them together. Then I pressed the seams on those rows. On the first row, I started by pressing the seams towards the left. On the second row, I probably ironed them all towards the right and then alternated them that way. That way, when I sewed row number 1 to row number 2, those seams were alternating each other. And they just nest together. Those seams nest together better. And then you don't have such a bulky spot at those seams when the seams are opposing each other. So that's how I put my mountain block together. And so, I mean, whether you make these into 6 blocks or the whole block, it doesn't matter. The end result is you want 3 mountain blocks, 3 whole mountain blocks. So when you're putting these together, just really watch your seam allowance. It should be 1/4 inch. And the pattern says that when this block is put together, it should be 8.5 inches square. So you can kind of use that as your guide when you are making these. But the one thing that I would say is don't trim any of your blocks until we get to the very last month and we're putting the quilt together, because you do not want those blocks to not be the right size. And if you trim them a little bit here and there, then you just never know if they're going to fit in the end. So I hope I've answered all your questions, and I hope that helps in putting the mountain blocks together, and I can't wait to see you in April. Happy sewing!